Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Allen. I am the Senior Director of Solutions Engineers for North America for TIBCO Software. With me today, I have Tom Backus from Microsoft. So, Tom, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Brian. Great to see you. Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Backus. I'm the Director of Supply Chain Strategy for Worldwide Retail and Consumer Goods here at Microsoft. So I sit at kind of the intersection of what our customers need, our partner capabilities like TIBCO here, and the first-party engineering services.
Fantastic. So with that, everybody, we all know that the pandemic disrupted supply chain operations globally. Both Tom and I have worked closely with many of our customers as they shifted to address the disruption and continue to do so to this very day. So for today, we selected this as a live streaming event. We want you to encourage everybody to get involved in the conversation. So please use the chat, engage with those who have joined, and ask questions of Tom or me. We plan on taking questions towards the end of this. We've prepared some topics up front to get the conversation flowing and to get all of you involved in the chat. So with that, Tom, I'm going to start off. So with the pandemic, retailers and manufacturers face disruption in the supply chain like never before. How have you seen these organizations respond to the challenges that they faced?
Yeah, really good question, Brian. And it's funny, actually, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was still on the real supply chain practitioner side of this stuff, and then moved kind of the consulting and support side in the midst of it. So it was just an unbelievable shift in consumer behavior that I saw firsthand. And when I think about, supply chains, not necessarily retail and CG specific, but certainly within retail and consumer goods, you spend a lot of time in supply chain focusing on what's going wrong and kind of exception management. You almost take for granted how really efficient day-to-day operations already are. But if I think about what 2020 was, I almost feel like it was a car crash in slow motion, right? It was everything you saw was breaking around you, but you kind of felt powerless in the moment to really change any of the outcomes. And it was unlike anything in my 15 years supply chain I saw, where every level of the network was impacted and all organizations were exposed for not having nearly as much coordination among your partners and suppliers for things like data sharing or visibility. So all of these things that you're taking for granted, like on-time delivery from your suppliers, flexible manufacturing capacity, inventory, safety stock to cover forecast misses, none of these things were givens anymore. And there was no real way to recover in an organized fashion. You couldn't deploy one region plan that would work somewhere else because the variables were always going to be different. So for that year, we spent a lot of time working on navigating just that immediate uncertainty. But the real focus I've seen, I guess, in the last 9 to 12 months as we're climbing out of that hole, organizations are really taking a step back and saying, okay, clearly we have some work to do in order to transform the business in a more holistic and sustainable fashion. So some of those key questions we think about, it starts with really where, if you think about everything that happened over the past year and a half, what are our blind spots? It's really clear there's not enough visibility upstream into supply chains, however far vertically you want to go. It could be your second tier, it could be your 10th tier. Everything was impacted. So you've got to be really crystal clear with what's going on with your suppliers. I think the other piece that's really interesting is customer demand patterns are shifting in real time, right? So there's a tremendous amount of reliance on historical sales data to infer about what's going to happen in the future, which impacts how do you account for your inventory placement, what should you be ordering, buying, producing yourselves. All of these things begin to shift because it's built against a network pattern that is, again, in flux against what your customer base is doing. And then the question becomes, even if you could effectively figure out where your product is coming from, where your demand is expected to be going to, how do you actually serve this kind of shifting customer base in terms of needs and expectations, right? What is the future going to hold? Is the network that you spent years or decades building, is it designed to handle the shifting consumer landscape against the benchmarks that you've set in a profitable manner? Another question, just real quick, if I think about it's all about efficiency, right? If you think about the way traditional retailers or CGs are built, it's all about scale. It's bulk moving full truckloads of product. And there's no denying what's gone on in the past 12 months, 15 months has accelerated e-commerce growth well beyond where investments are today. So how do you actually keep up with all these single unit orders or the omni-channel needs of consumers as we continue to move forward? There's a ton of physical limitations when you just think about network configuration, how product is sourced. How do you serve this based on the delivery speeds they want, the visibility to their orders, the cost measures per order? All of these things are really hard to consider. How do we move forward on? And the last piece is kind of the age-old adage of what happens in supply chain is it's just about mitigating risk, right? I think that we, hopefully, knock on wood here, all agree that the worst of this current event is over, but we probably can acknowledge that there's going to be more large-scale events in the future. There's going to be globally disruptive things that happen that are going to risk your ability to source, buy, distribute. Climate change is going to become stronger variable in the years coming up for whether it's crop growth, raw material availability, geopolitical instability. Even very recently has seen a disrupt traditional sourcing lanes for things like precious metals, to further delaying things like for, within stable disks and cars. It's going to be really challenging over the next year. Governments, we've seen in the U.S. with the change for the new leads, the U.S. has started requiring proof of origin and custody through supply chains on consumable goods. So this is going to continue to expand across sub-verticals, right? It's not just going to stay within retail or quick serve, fast restaurants, things like that. You're going to have to start planning for all these unknown variables really quickly. And it's about building the right process and strategy to account for those. So now I guess the question, and I'll turn it over to you, is it's not really about how do you solve it all at once. It's really where do we get started and how do we drive immediate impact for the pains that we have, but also think about the long-term plan that we're trying to build.
Fantastic. Going back on what you said too, it's like a car crash in slow motion that you see demand shock and supply chain shock all over the headlines. And we've got to minimize it, right? Shock is a very powerful word. And we want to make sure that we are providing the right people, processes, and technology to minimize those shocks, to make sure that the owners of the supply chain have the best available peoples and processes with them to make sure that we minimize the shocks or just completely eliminate them in the future. So with that, one of the things that we've been doing is that we ask a really important question up front is the immediate need a burning critical issue within the supply chain, or are we looking to take a look at the supply chain holistically? So with that, if it is the latter, and they're looking at a complete breakdown of the supply chain because it just utterly failed them during the pandemic, we started with metadata management. When we look at metadata, it's the DNA of your supply chain nervous system. And if you think about it, your entire supply chain, every single piece that touches that supply chain nervous system has an impact, can create those shocks. So there's three areas that we coach our customers to really pay attention to. So the first one is things. So we start looking at the metadata of things within the supply chain. And with that, it comes down to like warehouses, assets, products, materials, anything that was like a thing within that you can physically touch within that supply chain that you're providing. And then the parties involved, looking at customers, suppliers, employees, and even legal entities as part of the supply chain, because even a legal entity can create a disruption to that supply chain. So you have to make sure that you have very smooth relations, even from a legal perspective. You mentioned other countries and points of origin. All of that needs to run very, very smoothly to maintain that supply chain. And then finally, even the reference data itself. We're in the global economy. We've been in the global economy a long time. So we're looking at units of measure, currencies, billing codes, and even charts of accounts in order to manage all of the goods, services, and people that are part of this overall massive ecosystem. So first and foremost, it really is. When we're looking to starting from scratch and taking a big holistic view at the supply chain, it's all around the metadata, what makes up our supply chain, and then we start piecemealing it from there. And the next thing is that we start looking at that immediate need, and whether it is the movement of data, the management of data, or the analytics of the data. Those are our three key focus areas that we hit within that supply chain. And then finally, one thing that I'll just throw out there now too is that when you're looking for the recipe of success, we've been looking at streaming analytics plus visual analytics plus data virtualization, right? So I'm more of a technologist, right? I'm the ones that behind the scenes helping the key players within the supply chain. And when I look at those three areas, streaming analytics, visual analytics, data virtualization, making sure that all of the information is readily available for anyone to make a decision when it matters most to the business is what makes my day. That's why I get out of bed in the morning. So yeah, that's what we're going with it. So Tom, going back to you now. So I'll look at this next topic, okay? So the cost of doing nothing is significant. So can you talk about the ways your customers are differentiating by adopting modern technologies?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting time, right? So if I think back to my time in the industry, a typical RFP was very specific to saying, we need a point solution to execute this specific task within this specific silo. And now the scopes, when you look at what's going on with the request, they're widening, right? We want to consider multiple lines of business operations to unlock additional value. We're not talking about just give us a new WMS. We want to be able to ship not only full truckloads of products to downstream network locations, hundreds of miles away, but from the same warehouse, we want to be able to offer a specific subset of inventory to maybe local customers and be able to do pick, pack, ship, order fulfillment, and last mile capabilities within the same warehouse. And at just a conceptual level, this sounds pretty simple, but as an industry practitioner, everyone would know that not only does it require multiple separate systems, ERP record bookkeeping requirements, different deployment tools, they all need to be able to work in harmony for such an operation. And I think the takeaway I have as we talk about modern technology is that the story is not changing with supply chains. They're not going to get less complex than they are right now. And the mandate to drive better efficiencies and drive cost out, those are never going to change. So it's really how do we solve a way out of this problem? It's imperative to use technology to reduce the burden of operation on our customers. And that really adds the overall value to the ecosystem and help you stand out kind of in that specific process when you're thinking about the adoption process. And one thing I would say is, that's probably incentive enough, but if you just think about another aspect of kind of external pressures or societal pressures, just reading the tea leaves around what's going on with people who have signed up for the Paris 2050 agreement, where sustainable investment funds are going with gaining additional board seats, or even just the annual reports where customers worldwide are admitting that progress made to date on sustainability is not up to par with expectations. The only way to force the hand, and we're seeing this in EMEA already, is that regulations are coming sooner versus later to be able to drive visibility into where are your products coming from, who are the vendors involved, what are the labor practices of those vendors involved, what are their procurement processes. All of that provenance, not only for global organizations and government organizations can be required, but customers want to know that too, right? From the individual product they buy, they want to know their impact on the environment and how things are going. And there's going to have to be a heck of a lot of adoption of technology to be able to get customers where they want to go.
Fantastic stuff. So yeah, looking at that then, the last 12 to 18 months, the businesses interfacing with customers has also dramatically changed. Everybody was at home, the buying habits changed, where the product needed to go dramatically changed. So can you touch upon then how business to consumer relationships have changed and how that's impacting the supply chain?
Yeah, sure thing. I've tried to narrow this to just a couple of the most prevalent examples, so some may have heard of them. But I think what is interesting about these ones is that it has the potential to kind of change the way we think future as you look forward, right? So throw out the data that we have from 12 months ago and even just look at what's gone on this year, and the stickiness of some of these offerings is clearly here to stay. And some of the consumer adoption you thought maybe never in our lifetime we would see is already here in the millions of consumers. So we are forced to change at this point. And I think there's no greater example probably than last mile fulfillment, right? It permeates to almost every industry in terms of impact. So last year, grocery stores were one of the best examples where the multiplier they saw on just their growth, where they, some of them in the peak were hitting more than 50% of their orders were going to be online pickups or last mile delivery. That totally disrupts and breaks everything about case pick, order flow, where product is stored, where it's positioned. And now it's really about, that's one of those blind spots we talked about, right? Is it something that you continue to fulfill from the store? Is it something you enlist a third-party distribution warehouse for? Is it something that you can kind of intake to not eat into your profits necessarily, but it's a new operating expenditure? So there's a lot of things philosophically that we're grappling with in terms of how do these convenience or grocers or club mass stores kind of fill the void that we have, where that growth is still staying in the place that it is currently. Home fitness would be another one, right? We saw tremendous disruption of stores not being able to fill. So the traditional retailers where 90% of the plus of the volume went through was no longer the case. They had products stuck in warehouses overseas. Did they move manufacturing onshore? We're now grappling with the idea of where is production most efficient, and that will oscillate quickly. What is the complexity? Where are your raw materials sourced from? What is the price point your product is sold at? What is the markup that you have? Those things all are going to factor into how you handle your last mile fulfillment. And then the one other thing, it would be remiss not to call out like the Uber Eats and the DoorDash and the Grabs of the world, where it gave an avenue for smaller restaurants and smaller businesses to continue running, right? If you take a snapshot of what DoorDash was able to provide from a selection a year ago to where they are today, it's been tremendous growth. So that kind of thing, that's the demand gen and the customer engagement side of, is that something, again, we outsource, or do we need to take that in-house as that continues to grow? And it's philosophical, right? It's going to be different for every business, but it's going to be an important question to solve for as we move forward. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah. You mentioned DoorDash, and it just jarred something I read in a magazine recently. Just who would ever have thought that DoorDash and Walmart would have a strategic partnership, right? Just like
Absolutely.
18 months ago, nobody saw that coming, and bam, those two have hit it off, and it's really changed the way that Walmart is providing fulfillment.
Yeah, it's kind of unbelievable, right? Where you think about, there has always been a pretty strict wall in terms of information sharing and collaboration between retailers and CGs, where some do the execution with that last point of sale very well, and they rely on that mass scale upstream to be able to deliver against. And now you're seeing that the line is blurred, right? Whether it's things like private label coming up, or just better ways to engage with the customer. We know that there is definitely a lot of customers out there who have said that we did last mile as a stopgap to be able to still reach our customers. It does not make sense from an ROI perspective to go invest in this, because we expect that they enjoy the experience of coming to our stores better than shopping online. We're not going to be able to get there. So is it a partnership model that we look at? There's a lot of different approaches. There's not going to be a one size fits all for everyone. So it's just one of those considerations that goes into the long-term strategy.
Fantastic, right? So yeah, the technologist in me, when I look at the business to consumer relationship and how it's just changed the warehouse, right? How it's changed fulfillment and the strong relationships that are now being required from a technology perspective. And so, for example, whenever we're seeing a warehouse that can effectively utilize real-time information to identify multiple orders going to the same shipping address. And how then we could dynamically route or stop or even push trucks off of the loading dock to make sure that we're most efficiently packing those trucks, routing those trucks, and it's all happening within seconds. Mm-hmm. We just got 2 years ago that you pretty much knew what the orders were for the day, how they were going to be fulfilled from the warehouse. And now it's like you have people just grabbing packages off of shelves, throwing them at a driver and saying, go, right? Go. So it's a lot of fun to watch. And I enjoy the technology behind the scenes is making all of that happen. Everyone's getting paid. People are making money. Orders are being fulfilled and customers are smiling. Or having something sent to your house 2 hours after you order it, man, unbelievable. And the technology behind that is what powers all of it. So a lot of fun having those types of conversations as well.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, and that's where it almost feels like, if you think about the e-commerce space specifically for any of these businesses, it's like Q4 all year round now, right? And that's not necessarily how these systems are designed to handle it. So you mentioned the point of like, here are your orders that drop for the day. We'll figure out the ones for tomorrow, and that used to be the customer expectation. That's no longer the case, right? It needs to be continuously batching. Customers want understanding of, I know the behind the scenes of these e-commerce giants. And when I order 4 things and 2 are going to come on one day and then 2 are going to come in 2 separate packages a day later, I understand some of the nuances, but it'd be great to have it explained of like, it wasn't available at this DC, or it missed a cutoff time for this window. Those are the things that you want to see come into play, but it just goes back to that complexity thing, right? As you're adding all these different touch points for distribution, you're never going to get there with the resources that are at your fingertips and the workforce you have today. And that's an indictment of where we are. It's just the fact that we're adding different levels of difficulty to an already complex problem. So I think that automation is really obviously going to be a huge part of the path forward. Do you want to talk to that a little bit in terms of where you see automation playing in?
Sure thing. And here I am. So a little side note here for the audience is that Tom and I, when we were dry running for this thing, we just talked and time flew by, and here it is. We're already 20 minutes into this. So I do want to make sure that we're carving some time for the audience. But man, automation. So of course, that said, what gets me out of bed in the morning. And this is a fun example I like talking about. Is that when we were kids, we had Old MacDonald Had a Farm, right? We all know that song, right? But now it's Old MacDonald Had a Drone. It's like crazy. Like thinking about what the nation's farmers, what the world's farmers are using to provide life-giving food to the world. And so with technology as part of a really vibrant supply chain, these drones are giving instantaneous feedback to the farmers, looking at blight, maybe insect diseases as part of the food chain, and then using IoT in the soil. Like, again, who would have thought of that? And now it's vital as part of the supply chain to make sure that these crops are performing at their optimal levels. They're getting the optimal yield from the fields to make sure that they're hitting all of their downstream targets for the CPGs and the food producers of the world.
Yeah.
So just this understanding from that perspective that a farmer could realize the soil composition from IoT, from sensors planted in the ground, that now they need to order more water. They need to irrigate their fields differently. Yep. And all of that is just a wonderful part of the technology that we're providing to agri-science and to the farmers of the world in order to make all of this happen. You know, we can talk about dynamic supply. So whenever we're looking at manufacturers, one of our customers is a floor tile manufacturer, and they're utilizing APIs and data science to dynamically provision all of the raw materials required. One of the big use cases, we're talking about shocks to the system and making sure that they're hitting their commitments to their customers, is that if a raw material was promised by a certain date and there was a slip to that date, they were using spreadsheets, emails, phone calls, very costly, very slow to adapt, right? So now through the use of algorithms and data science, they are automatically canceling orders with the current supplier and dynamically placing new orders with the preferred supplier B, for example, negotiating price electronically and having all of those orders fulfilled within hours instead of days.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. I think that both of those, the first one on just the agricultural side really is near and dear when I think about it. It's some stat that's like 40% of crop yield is gone to waste through like supply chain inefficiencies, right? As you think about populations continuing to grow globally, it's being more efficient with what you are producing or being able to produce more that's going to keep us in a sustainable state. So that's fantastic. And then the other piece that you bring up is, you know, I've done the material procurement thing a long time ago, but that's near and dear to my heart of just being able to one, not only find, because we're so rigid in our sourcing practices today, really across both industries, to be able to one, find backup raw materials to keep, no production downtime or anything like that. But then also to find if you are able to find those backup suppliers, you're usually taking a hit on the cost piece, right? And it goes into somewhere else in the budget, and you're gonna miss the number for the period. So the fact that you can do that without necessarily needing extra headcount or being more vigilant, and you can do it at the best of the business is fantastic to hear.
Excellent. So Tom, I see something popped up in the comments section from Nupendra, and I wanted to touch upon it. And so we're looking at like a bunch of products with solutions from artificial intelligence, event-based APIs, warehouse storage. You know, we all need that information. Reports need to be delivered, whether they're static reports or dynamic visualizations on a dashboard. Information in the right hands at the right time is paramount to success.
Totally.
And I wanted to touch on this earlier, but I've been critical, and with time in the top right-hand screen here is another thing that I've been challenging my customers from a creative perspective is that almost everybody's heard of the butterfly effect, right? So one little event can disrupt an entire nation, right? So I've challenged our customers in being creative about their supply chain is the butterfly effect. What damage or what opportunity can be created because of a butterfly. So what is your butterfly? What are you thinking about that really can cause harm, or the company can react rapidly to have a competitive edge over their competitors? So the butterfly effect is fantastic. That goes into event-based APIs and how you utilize and set up a vibrant software world, a hardware world, a cloud platform world to take advantage of the butterfly effect. Totally. And I have always coached everybody to treat every single piece of technology, whether it's a very small IoT sensor or to an ERP or an MRP system, those are radio stations. Everything should just be broadcasting information. Whoever wants to subscribe to that information, wants to tune in that radio station so they can act upon an event is how they are going to provide that competitive edge.
Yeah. I really like the analogy, and I'll probably steal radio station from you, truthfully. The piece I like about what you called out is that I am not going to just say there's one area, right? When I think about an end-to-end supply chain, you could argue there's probably 5 functional silos that you look at from all the way from procurement through distribution. And the challenge that customers have today is that, again, it goes back to the complexity. So you literally only have time in the day to focus on your specific areas of need. So when you think about people who are planning for buying things 3 months, 6 months, a year in advance, to then making something a month in advance, and then you distribute it a week in advance, and then it gets to the customer the day of. They've all got very specific KPIs and silos of responsibility that they're looking at. So all they can see is what's in front of them, right? And I would challenge is that as you're able to aggregate that data and then provide static or refreshed reporting that will show them, hey, there are things going on in the supply chain that are not necessarily your direct responsibility, but will have direct impact to you being able to actually execute your tasks. And then even going that next level and saying, here are some prescriptive recommendations on how we mitigate that. There's obviously the control tower concept of people seeing the health of a supply chain and where these things are going to go and what do you do, but it's always going to come back to the operator of making the best decision based on what they know in front of them, right? So it's kind of that 6 degrees of separation. It's giving them more relationship and understanding of what's going on around them so that they can help make decisions on behalf of the company. And that's what really excites me about what you're calling out there in terms of making that data kind of democratized for all.
Yeah, you just touched on something, Tom, that a really smart person taught me once, that it was talking about the too late architecture. And how companies provide a competitive advantage is that this person said that if you just have a little bit of the right information in the right context at the right time, it's more powerful than all the data in the world 2 hours too late.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, you have that individual that can make a decision that can dramatically change the business. And if it's just the right information, the right context, the right time, you're off and running. And that's the power of streaming analytics, streaming data, and event-driven APIs, aka the radio station analogy.
Totally true. Couldn't agree more. And it's also about the way that you're talking about the visualizations where it's a deluge of data at this point, right? Everyone is drowning in information, and it's being able to filter to the right things, and that's where those visualization analytics give you the point of like, here, there's 10 things you need to focus on. If you only have time for 3, here's what you go after, and here's what you do about it. And just because everyone could very easily just get into their routine and say, okay, here's a new tool or application or something dashboard that I can look at, but here's how I know to execute my job. The easier you make it for them to ingest and kind of have some process change to their day, the more successful you're going to be as an organization.
Good stuff. Okay. Hey, I see a comment from Luis asking a couple questions, and then how are we preparing for the next big disruption? And then how do we move from conference room planning to real world implementation?
Yeah, really good question. I think, like we said, it's a little bit different for every organization based on where do they potentially operate globally. What are their limiting factors in terms of, do they own their own production? Are they reliant heavily on suppliers? But I think that it does kind of go into these visualization capabilities that we're calling out, right? It's not necessarily there's a million variables, and you could call out the butterfly effect in other areas of the world impacting what's going to happen to you without you even knowing, right? And we have a very good example of last year of that. It's about having visibility upstream and downstream, right? So understanding where your customers are going in terms of maybe health trends or changing customer sentiment around your products. Maybe there's going to be massive disruptions, like something like the Suez Canal happening again, knock on wood again, hopefully it never happens again. But it is truly about control tower visibility is not going to be for everybody. It doesn't make sense for every business model, but it is empowering the idea that you are building additional agility and resiliency into all of your everyday processes, whether it's warehousing or transportation or demand forecasting. We've got to get away from this idea that we need to squeeze every ounce of efficiency out of a supply chain, because if you lock yourself into one specific way of operating, you're never going to succeed in a world that's going to become more and more uncertain as we move forward.
A half an hour is such a short period of time. And one of the things we didn't touch upon that I thought we would have, and 30 minutes is gone, but it's digital twins, right? So looking at digital twins and the power that can provide you. And again, being the technologist, I'm looking at that metadata, putting it into a model ops world, a model driven world, and then executing thousands of scenarios against the digital twin for optimal outcomes.
Totally.
And so Luis, even in looking at that's an area where I challenge my customers. If you really want to look at the massive supply chain that you have, start from the blueprint, go down to the basics, the bits and the bytes of your supply chain, understanding who all is involved in the supply chain, and then start building out models, data science. And then if you have that appetite, digital twins are phenomenal. Especially in our high-tech manufacturing world, we have many customers that already have a digital twin of their assembly lines as well as their supply chain, to understand disruptions and how they can avoid them and optimize yield, optimize fulfillment, and then even optimize the relationships with transportation and logistics.
Yeah, I mean, we've got some very interesting things going on in the manufacturing space for that as well as just straight up supply chain. So I'd say it's a fantastic topic, but if we're going to do a follow-up on that, let's plan for an hour for digital twins.
Okay, I think we have time for one more. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I see Madava. Welcome, my friend. How are you? So do you think the manufacturing industry is ready to take a big leap in the IoT-based solution investments like predictive intelligence in the current situation? The answer is absolutely yes. A big message to take away from this event as well is that over the past 2 years now, we have seen executives move the supply chain from a cost center to a competitive advantage. There is a lot of investment going into supply chain right now. And with that, you're primed to take into account IoT-based solutions. We look at the assembly line. We look at all of the sensors that are just producing thousands of events per minute, and then how that can all be aggregated into a technical control tower, Tom, as I've been calling it. So when you look at a technology control tower as part of your visibility into assembly, into the visibility of the supply chain, that again, you're going to be able to optimize people, processes, and technology even better. And one more example that I can give on that one is even port management, using IoT in port management. So of course, we think of airports, and that's an easy analogy of the control tower of an airport. But then even understanding vessel management, massive vessels coming into port, and there is traffic streamed along the ocean for those vessels waiting their turn so they can unload and reload cargo so they can be moving and in productive use. And IoT takes a big a part of having that optimal port management ability, both from the inbound and outbound vessel management, as well as all of the technology and assets required to effectively move cargo once it's on the ground at the port. So there's no doubt about it that IoT is critical to the future and not having any more demand shocks in the supply chain.
Absolutely.
Okay, with that, Tom, this has been a blast, man. It was great preparing, and it was a great speaking with the world. Thank you for all of you that took the time to attend today, that participated by providing comments. And both of us, LinkedIn event, we're available on LinkedIn if anybody would like to message us. And I look forward to having more of these events in the future. It was a blast, Tom.
Thanks for the time, Brian.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.